The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. My father sat 3 rows behind me, his hands folded, his jaw tight like he was bracing for impact. My sister stared straight ahead, pretending I didn't exist. Then the judge leaned forward and asked my father one simple question. Just one. Not about loyalty, not about forgiveness, about money, about responsibility, about whether he had ever offered to fix what his pride and joy had broken. The color drained from his face. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. The truth didn't need me to defend it anymore. I'm Sergeant Emily Carter, United States Army. I'm 29 years old, and 3 weeks ago I sat in a county courtroom wearing civilian clothes that felt like a costume, watching my parents testify against me. Not against the person who stole my identity, not against the one who opened credit cards in my name, against me. If you'd told me a year ago that my own father would look a judge in the eye and call me vindictive for reporting a crime, I would have laughed. I would have said you didn't know my family, that my dad believed in hard work, accountability, and doing the right thing, that my sister was his pride, sure, but not at the expense of truth. I was wrong. The bailiff called the case number, and we all stood. The judge entered, robes swaying slightly as she took her seat. I remember thinking how ordinary she looked. No drama, no anger, just tired eyes and a stack of files. My life reduced to paper clipped together. I didn't look back when my parents walked in. I didn't need to. I could feel my mother's disappointment like pressure on the back of my neck. My father didn't come sit next to me. He went straight to the row behind my sister, placed a hand on her shoulder, and left it there. That was the moment it became real. My sister Rachel was the defendant, charged with identity theft and credit card fraud. 7 cards, $59,000, all in my name, all traced back to my parents' address. I was the victim. And somehow I was also the villain. Before I tell you what the judge asked my father, before I tell you how a single question unraveled the story he'd been telling himself for years, I need to take you back to the beginning. To the morning my phone buzzed in a barracks hallway, and everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed. Because this didn't start in a courtroom, it started with a credit alert. I was on base at Fort Cavazos, waiting for my shift to start. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. I remember scrolling through emails, half listening to 2 privates arguing about weekend duty when my phone vibrated. Credit alert, significant change detected. I almost ignored it. My credit score didn't change. I paid everything on time. I tracked my money the same way I tracked my gear, methodical, precise, no room for error. That habit had kept me afloat since I enlisted at 19. But something made me tap the notification. The number that loaded didn't make sense. I stared at it like it was written in another language. 3 months earlier, my score was 760. You don't drop over 300 points by accident. That kind of fall means something catastrophic. My hands started shaking as I pulled up the full report. 1 card, then another, then another. Names I recognized. Capital One, Chase, Discover. Cards I had never opened. Balances maxed out. Missed payments. Late fees stacked on top of late fees. Total debt $59,214. I sat down on the cold tile floor because my knees stopped working. I called the first bank listed. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. There has to be a mistake, I said. I didn't open this account. The woman on the line paused. Ma'am, these accounts were opened using your social security number. The billing address on file is... She read it out loud. My parents' house. The walls felt like they were closing in. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Same address, same zip code, the place I grew up, the place my father still called home. I hung up and pulled up another statement. Then another. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Charges at department stores, online shopping sprees, a weekend hotel stay, a balance transfer fee dated on my birthday. I thought of Rachel's Instagram posts, the new boots, the new phone, the captions about starting fresh and treating yourself. My chest tightened. Rachel was 4 years older than me, the one my dad always worried about, the sensitive one, the one who felt things deeply. Growing up, she needed help. I didn't. Or at least that's what everyone decided. "You're strong, Emily," my father used to say. "You'll be fine." So I learned not to ask. I paid my own way through community college before enlisting. I sent money home when Rachel needed a little help. I gave my parents my information whenever they asked because they were family. Because what kind of daughter questions her own father? Now I was sitting on a barracks floor staring at a debt I didn't create, realizing my financial future, and possibly my military career, was hanging by a thread. Security clearances don't like unexplained debt. Commanders don't like soldiers who look like a liability. I stood up slowly and went outside. The Texas heat hit me like a wall. My uniform clung to my skin as I dialed my father's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Em," he said, warm as always. "What's going on?" I opened my mouth to speak and nothing came out. I was still trying to find the version of reality where this wasn't happening. "Dad," I finally said, "did Rachel open credit cards in my name?" There was a pause, not confusion, not surprise. Just silence. "Emily," he said carefully, "why don't you come home this weekend and we'll talk about it?" That was when I knew. And that was when the life I thought I was protecting began to unravel. I drove home that weekend with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Fort Cavazos to my parents' house was just under 3 hours long enough for my thoughts to loop and spiral without mercy. Mile after mile of flat Texas highway scrubgrass and faded billboards, and one question pounding in my head. How long had this been happening? My parents' house looked the same as it always had. Beige siding, white porch railing my dad repainted every other summer, the American flag hanging by the door slightly frayed at the edges. For a second I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted, that there was an explanation that didn't end with betrayal. Then Rachel's car was in the driveway. A newer model than the one she'd had last year. I parked behind her and sat there for a moment, engine off, keys still in my hand. I remembered being 10 years old, standing in this same driveway with a scraped knee bleeding through my jeans. My dad had glanced at me then, back at Rachel, who was crying because she'd missed a goal at soccer practice. "You're fine, Em," he'd said. "Go wash up. Your sister needs me right now." I got out of the car. Rachel was on the couch scrolling through her phone when I walked in. She looked up, smiled too quickly, then set the phone face down. My mom stood in the kitchen, hands busy with nothing. My dad leaned against the counter, arms crossed, already guarded. No one offered me a hug. I didn't sit down. "How long?" I asked. Rachel's eyes flicked to my dad. "Emily," he said, sighing like I was already exhausting him, "let's all calm down." "How long have you been using my identity?" I asked again, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Rachel's mouth trembled. She stood up and crossed her arms, shrinking into herself the way she always did when things went wrong. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I just needed time. Time to do what I snapped. Run up $59,000. My mom gasped softly. "Emily, please." I turned to her. "You knew." She looked down at the counter. That was answer enough. My dad stepped forward. "Your sister's been struggling." "So you stole my life," I said to Rachel. "That was the solution." "I didn't steal anything," she shot back, suddenly defensive. "I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back once I got on my feet." "You opened 7 credit cards in my name," I said. "That's not borrowing." "You're in the Army," she said, her voice rising. "You have a steady paycheck, benefits. You're fine." There it was, the sentence that had followed me my entire life. "You're fine." I laughed short and sharp. "I'm not fine. My credit is destroyed. I could lose my clearance, my career." My dad held up a hand. "That's dramatic." I stared at him. "Dramatic, Dad? This is a felony." He shook his head. "This is family. We don't call the police on family." I felt something inside me crack. "So what's the plan? I just pay for it." My mom finally spoke. "We thought maybe you could help her get back on track. Slowly, over time." "Over time," I repeated. "This will follow me for years." Rachel sniffed. I said I was sorry. I looked at her. Really looked. No shame, no fear, just annoyance that I'd found out. "I'll make payments when I can," she said. "But I can't sign anything legal. What if something happens?" "What if something happens?" I echoed. "Something already happened." My dad's voice hardened. "Enough. You're not ruining your sister's life over money." I felt my hands shaking. "You're asking me to ruin mine instead." He stared at me like he didn't understand the problem. "You're strong, Emily. You always land on your feet." That was it, the sentence that explained everything. Rachel wasn't the one expected to carry consequences, I was. I tried one last time. "If she signs a repayment agreement, I won't go to the police." Rachel shook her head immediately. "No, that's not fair." My dad nodded. "She's right. We're not turning this into a legal mess." Something went quiet inside me, the part that still hoped. "Then I'll handle it myself," I said. My mom's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm filing a police report." Rachel burst into tears. My mom rushed to her side. My dad's face went red. "You wouldn't," he said. "I would," I replied, "and I am." He pointed toward the door. "If you do this, don't come back here." I walked out without another word. The drive back to base felt unreal, like I was watching my life from the outside. I filed the report on Monday, gave statements, handed over documents. The detective didn't flinch. "This is identity theft," she said, clear as day. When my parents found out, my dad left a voicemail. "You've crossed a line," he said. "You've embarrassed this family." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a courtroom realizing embarrassment was the least of it. By the time the court date arrived, I had stopped sleeping through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed numbers instead of dreams. Balances, interest rates, due dates. The slow, relentless math of a life unraveling because someone else decided my name was convenient. Back on base, I kept my posture straight and my voice even. I did PT, I showed up early, I hit every standard. On paper, I was still Sergeant Emily Carter, reliable, squared away, trusted. Inside, I was holding my breath, waiting for the fallout. The first meeting with my commanding officer was professional but stiff. He didn't accuse me of anything. He didn't have to. He slid a printed copy of my credit report across the desk, tapped the total debt with his pen, and said, "This could become a problem if it isn't resolved." "I'm working on it, sir," I said. He nodded. "I hope so. You have a good record. Don't let personal issues become professional ones." Personal issues, that's what my life had been reduced to. The banks started calling. Morning, night. Numbers I didn't recognize lighting up my phone. Voicemails stacking up, each one more urgent than the last. I answered when I could, explained the fraud, asked for time. Some were sympathetic, others weren't. "According to our records, ma'am, these accounts were opened with your consent." "No," I said for the 100th time, "they weren't." "You'll need to prove that." "Prove it." I faxed police reports. I uploaded affidavits. I mailed copies of my ID and military orders, showing I'd been deployed or in training during some of the account openings. Every step felt like begging to be believed about my own life. One afternoon during lunch, I sat in my car scrolling through Rachel's social media again, even though I knew I shouldn't. It was like pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurt. There it was. A post from 8 months earlier. A smiling selfie in a department store mirror, shopping bags at her feet. The caption read, "Fresh Start Energy." The timestamp matched a charge on one of the cards. $2,300, same store. I shut my phone off and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was grieving. Not the money, not the credit score. The idea of my family. The belief that when it came down to it, my parents would protect me the way I'd always protected myself. The detective assigned to my case, Detective Harris, called me 2 weeks before the hearing. "We've finished the preliminary investigation," she said. "The evidence is strong." "How strong?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Clear pattern, multiple accounts, charges tied to your parents' address, IP addresses, text messages where your sister asked for your information. It's going to court." My stomach dropped. My parents are furious. "That doesn't change the facts," she replied. "Are you prepared for them to show up?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "They often do," she said. "Sometimes not for the reason you hope." The night before the hearing, my father finally called. Not to apologize, not to ask how I was holding up. "Rachel's attorney says this could ruin her future," he said. I closed my eyes. "She ruined mine." "She made a mistake," he insisted. "You're taking this too far." "Too far would have been pretending this didn't happen," I said. "Too far would have been letting her keep doing it." There was a pause. If you loved your sister, you'd drop the charges. If you loved me, I said quietly, you wouldn't ask me to. He hung up. The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy blazer and a white blouse. My uniform stayed in the closet. I didn't want the courtroom to see a soldier. I wanted them to see a person. When I arrived, Rachel was already there with her attorney. She looked smaller somehow. No makeup, hair pulled back. She didn't look at me. Then my parents walked in. They didn't acknowledge me. They went straight to her. My mother took Rachel's hand. My father leaned in and whispered something that made her nod. They sat behind her like a wall. I felt something in my chest tighten, not surprise but confirmation. This was the side they'd chosen. The judge entered. The bailiff called the case. Charges were read. Rachel pled not guilty, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. Then her attorney stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to call character witnesses. My heart dropped. My mother took the stand first. She's not a criminal, she said, tears in her eyes. She's a good person who got overwhelmed. Then my father. My other daughter has always been resentful, he said, looking straight ahead. She's using this to punish her sister. I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, listening to my own father rewrite my life. And then the judge looked up from the file. That's when everything changed. The judge didn't interrupt my parents while they spoke. She didn't sigh or frown or give any outward sign of what she was thinking. She simply listened, pen moving slowly across a yellow legal pad, eyes dropping to the documents in front of her, and then lifting again to study the people in her courtroom. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she stepped down from the witness stand, carefully avoiding my gaze. My father followed, shoulders squared, jaw set, like he'd just defended something sacred. Rachel sat very still at the defendant's table. Her attorney leaned close and whispered something to her. She nodded, the picture of fragility, the daughter worth saving. I felt hollow, not angry, not shocked, just emptied out, like someone had reached inside and scooped away the last soft part of me. For a brief moment I wondered if I should have stayed quiet, if maybe all of this, the debt, the damage, the court, was worse than living with the lie. That was the voice I'd been trained to listen to my whole life. The one that said, don't rock the boat. Don't make it harder. You can handle it. Then I looked at the stack of papers in front of the judge. My credit report, the affidavits, the transaction logs, the evidence I hadn't imagined. The judge adjusted her glasses and finally spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, she said evenly, please remain standing. My parents froze. My father reached for my mother's hand, squeezing it once like they were bracing together. I've listened to your testimony, the judge continued. You believe your daughter Rachel made a mistake. You believe this matter should have been handled privately. And you believe your other daughter's actions are motivated by resentment rather than harm. My mother nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly. I didn't ask a question yet, the judge said calmly. Silence fell like a weight. She looked down at the file again. According to the evidence, 7 credit cards were opened using Sergeant Carter's social security number. The total debt is approximately $59,000. The accounts were linked to your residence. Is that correct? My father cleared his throat. That's what the paperwork says. The judge looked up. And you are aware that identity theft and credit card fraud are felonies? Yes, Your Honor, my father said. She paused, just long enough for the room to hold its breath. Then I have one question, she said. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. She turned her gaze fully to my father. At any point before or after this was discovered, did you offer to repay, co-sign, or otherwise assume responsibility for the $59,000 your daughter Rachel incurred in Sergeant Carter's name? My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The judge waited. 5 seconds passed, 10. My mother's breathing turned shallow. My father stared at the floor. I didn't ask if you could afford it, the judge said gently. I asked if you offered. My father swallowed hard. No, he said finally. The word landed with a dull thud. Did you propose a payment plan, the judge asked. No. Did you contact any of the creditors on behalf of Sergeant Carter? No. Did you offer any form of restitution to the victim of this crime? My father's shoulders sagged. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded once as if she'd expected that answer all along. "You've asked this court to view Sergeant Carter's report as vindictive," she said. "Yet there is no evidence that you took any steps to mitigate the harm she suffered. Instead, you appear to have expected her to absorb the consequences on her own." My mother began to cry. Not the controlled tears she'd shown earlier, but deep, shaky sobs. My father didn't look at her. The judge turned her attention to Rachel. "Ms. Carter, the evidence against you is substantial. Multiple accounts documented transactions and communications requesting personal information from the victim. Based on what I've reviewed this matter, we'll proceed to trial." Rachel's attorney started to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Bail will remain in place," she said. "No contact with the victim. Passport surrendered. Mandatory check-ins." She looked back at my parents. "This court does not require one child to sacrifice their future to preserve the comfort of another. Accountability is not cruelty. It is justice." The gavel came down. As the bailiff called the next case, Rachel finally turned around. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something that wasn't fear or regret. It was anger. She wasn't sorry she'd done it. She was sorry I'd refused to carry it for her. I stood up on legs that felt strangely steady. My parents didn't follow me out. They stayed behind Rachel, closing ranks one last time. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter, not because the damage was undone, but because the truth had been spoken out loud by someone who mattered. I knew the trial was still ahead. I knew the consequences would take years to fully unwind. But for the first time since that credit alert buzzed on my phone, I felt something close to solid ground beneath my feet. The story my father had told, that I was heartless, resentful, disloyal, had finally collapsed under the weight of a single question. And nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks between the hearing and the sentencing stretched out longer than any deployment I'd ever known. There were no explosions, no alarms, no shouted commands, just waiting. The quiet kind that lets your thoughts circle endlessly, picking at old wounds and new fears until everything feels raw. Back on base, life continued as if nothing had happened. Reveille still sounded at dawn. Boots still hit pavement in perfect rhythm. Orders still came down clean and precise. The army didn't care that my family had fractured in a courtroom. It cared that I showed up, did my job, and kept my personal life from becoming a liability. I did all three. I kept my head down and my record clean. I followed up with every bank, every creditor, every agency. I sent copies of court documents and police reports until the words "identity theft victim" felt stamped onto my identity as permanently as my rank. Some days the calls were civil, other days they weren't. "We still need payment, Sergeant Carter." I didn't open the account. That doesn't change the balance. Those conversations left me drained in a way no 12-mile ruck march ever had. Physical exhaustion had an end point. This didn't. Rachel didn't reach out. She wasn't allowed to per the court's order, but even if she had been, I knew she wouldn't have. In her version of events, I was the enemy. The sister who'd broken the unspoken rule: protect the family no matter the cost. My parents were silent too. No texts, no calls, not even a neutral update. The distance felt deliberate, like punishment. One night after a particularly long day, I sat alone in my apartment and stared at my phone, willing it to light up. Part of me wanted my father to call and say he'd been wrong, that he'd chosen comfort over truth, and finally understood what it cost. Another part of me already knew better. Detective Harris called exactly 4 weeks after the hearing. Her voice was steady, professional. "Rachel accepted a plea agreement," she said. "She's pleading guilty to identity theft and credit card fraud." I closed my eyes. What does that mean? 2 years suspended sentence, 5 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution. The word restitution echoed, all of it. Yes, $59,000 plus interest, monthly payments. I did the math without thinking. At Rachel's income level, it would take years, a decade, maybe more. If she misses a payment, I asked. She violates probation, Detective Harris said, and serves the full sentence. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not joy, not satisfaction, just the knowledge that consequences now existed outside my body. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. I thought I'd feel vindicated, or relieved. What I felt instead was tired, bone deep, tired. 3 days later, my father called. I almost didn't answer. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Emily," he said, "can we talk?" About what I asked. A pause, about everything. We met at a coffee shop halfway between my base and my parents' house. Neutral ground, no family photos on the walls, no history embedded in the furniture. He looked smaller sitting across from me. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his cup. "I didn't handle this right," he said finally. I waited. "I thought I was protecting your sister," he continued. "I didn't see that I was hurting you." I studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the stubborn set of his mouth. "You saw," I said quietly. "You just decided it was acceptable." He flinched. "I didn't think you'd break." "I didn't," I said. "I bent. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I should have stood with you. In that courtroom." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Silence settled between us. This wasn't reconciliation. It was an inventory of damage. "I'm not asking you to choose me over Rachel," I said, "but I won't be sacrificed to keep the peace anymore." He looked down. "Your mother isn't ready." "I know," I said. "When she is, she can call me." We parted without hugging. The first restitution check arrived 2 months later, $412. I deposited it and watched the number in my account change by an amount that barely registered. But it was proof that the story had shifted, that the burden was no longer mine alone. That night I slept through until morning for the first time in months. The sentencing hearing was quieter than the arraignment, but it carried more weight. There were no character witnesses this time, no speeches about family loyalty. No one stood up to explain how Rachel was really a good person who just needed understanding. The facts were already on the record, and facts don't need defending when they've finally been acknowledged. I sat alone on one of the hard wooden benches, hands folded in my lap back straight out of habit. I'd taken the morning off duty and driven in early, parking 3 blocks away so I could walk and clear my head. The air was cold, sharp, and my lungs grounding. Rachel sat at the defendant's table again, but she looked different now. Smaller. Not in a fragile way, more like someone who'd realized the world wasn't going to bend around her anymore. Her attorney spoke briefly. She nodded when prompted. She didn't look at me. My parents arrived together, but they didn't sit behind her this time. They took seats farther back, separated by a small but unmistakable gap. My mother stared at her hands. My father kept his eyes on the judge. When the judge reviewed the plea agreement and pronounced the sentence, Rachel's shoulders slumped just slightly. Probation, community service, mandatory counseling, restitution, a felony conviction that would follow her everywhere. The gavel fell and it was over. No dramatic outburst, no apologies. Just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another that would take years to resolve. As people began to file out, my father stood up slowly. He hesitated, then walked toward me. For a moment I wondered if he'd say something here in the open where the truth couldn't be rewritten. Instead, he stopped a few feet away. "You got what you wanted," he said quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a punch, how to stand my ground, just not against him. "No," I said. "I got what was right." He didn't respond. He turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw my mother in person. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Not normal, just different. I continued to repair what I could. My credit score crept upward point by point. Fraudulent accounts were closed. Notes were added to my file explaining the circumstances. It would take time, but time was something I finally felt allowed to have. At work, my commander called me into his office again. This time there was no tension. I reviewed the court outcome, he said. "You handled this the right way." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you, sir." He nodded. "It takes integrity to do what you did, especially when it's personal." Integrity, a word my father used to claim as his own. I started therapy a month later, something I'd put off for years. Sitting across from a stranger and saying, "My family chose my sister over me," felt heavier than carrying a rucksack uphill. But each session peeled back another layer I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I wasn't angry all the time anymore, just occasionally, and when it came I let it pass instead of swallowing it whole. The first time Rachel's restitution payment cleared, I stared at the deposit confirmation for a long time. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the acknowledgement. The paper trail that said, plainly, this was not yours to carry alone. My father texted once months later, a single line. "I hope you're doing well." I stared at it, then put my phone down. Some bridges don't burn, they just fade into the distance. One evening, standing in my kitchen making dinner for one, I realized I was humming under my breath. The sound startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that without thinking. Healing wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It showed up quietly in small moments that didn't demand attention. I was no longer waiting for permission to move on. The last thing to return was silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that followed the phone calls and court dates, but a softer version, one that didn't demand answers or explanations. The kind that let me sit with my own thoughts without immediately bracing for impact. 6 months after the sentencing, my life looked ordinary from the outside. I woke up early, I went to work, I trained, I paid my bills, I checked my credit report once a month instead of once a day. The number kept inching upward, slowly, steadily. Proof that damage could be repaired if you stopped pretending it wasn't there. Rachel's restitution payments arrived like clockwork. Small amounts, never enough to feel satisfying. But enough to matter. Enough to remind me that accountability existed beyond words. I never cashed them with any sense of triumph. Each deposit came with a complicated mix of relief and grief. Relief that the burden had shifted. Grief for the sister I thought I had, the one who would have protected me the way I'd protected her. That sister never existed. The hardest part wasn't losing Rachel. It was losing the version of my father I'd built my life around. We spoke once more nearly a year later. Not planned, not emotional, just a chance encounter at a grocery store near my parents' house when I was visiting a friend nearby. He looked older, thinner, like someone who'd been carrying something heavy without knowing where to set it down. "Emily," he said, uncertain. "Dad," I replied. We stood there between shelves of canned soup and boxed pasta, surrounded by strangers who had no idea our history was collapsing quietly in aisle 7. "I didn't raise you to turn on your family," he said finally. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to explain, justify, soften, the need to be understood. Instead, I took a breath. "You raised me to tell the truth," I said. "I just stopped lying for everyone else." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. He nodded once, like he was filing that answer away somewhere he might visit later. That was enough. My mother never reached out. I stopped waiting for her to. At some point, hope turns into habit, and habits can be broken. What surprised me most wasn't the loss, it was the space that opened up after. The energy I'd spent managing other people's emotions was suddenly my own again. I used it to build something quieter, sturdier. I found an apartment closer to base. Nothing fancy, clean, mine. I hung my uniform carefully instead of letting it sit in a heap like it mattered again. Like I mattered again. In therapy, I learned a phrase that stuck with me: being the easy one isn't a compliment, it's a warning sign. I'd spent my whole life being the one who didn't need much, the one who adjusted, the one who absorbed impact so others didn't have to feel it. I thought that was strength. Now I know strength is saying no without apology. Strength is letting people sit with the consequences of their choices instead of cushioning every fall. Sometimes late at night I still thought about what might have happened if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd paid the debt, if I'd let the story be rewritten to keep the peace. I imagined a version of myself years down the line, tired, resentful, still cleaning up messes that weren't mine. Then I'd look around my apartment, at the calm, at the order, at the life that was slowly, deliberately becoming my own. And I'd know I chose right. People like to say family is everything. What they mean is that family is supposed to be safe. When it isn't, when love comes with conditions and loyalty requires self-destruction, something has already gone wrong. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped holding it together with my silence. If you're listening to this, and you're standing at that same crossroads between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not cruel for choosing accountability. You are not heartless for refusing to be used. And you are not alone for walking away from a role that was never fair to begin with. If this story resonated with you, I'd like to know. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about boundaries, truth, and finding your footing again, consider subscribing so we can keep this conversation going. We don't heal by staying quiet. We heal by telling the truth together.